Hello folks, I'm going to talk to you now in this video about some keywords which apply to the UK government side of the course, and some of those key terms which will hopefully help with revision and things like that too. So without further ado, let's begin. Probably the most important one, and you find yourself using this on the American part of the course endlessly as well, is this idea of constitution. Okay, the idea of the American system having a written constitution and the UK system not having a written constitution, but having a constitution all the same. So this is a set of laws that determine the relationship, the powers, the responsibilities of the various branches of government and people, the way in which they operate essentially. And of course, being a very old country, these have grown up in Britain over best part of 1,000 years really, whereas a relatively young country like America has its constitution written down. Most countries incidentally have their constitutions written down. Unwritten constitution, UK, New Zealand, Israel, Canada, of the democracies, but generally speaking countries have their constitution written down. The French Republic, for example, to pick a neighbouring country, uses the Code Napoleon, developed under Bonaparte, under Napoleon, of course, at the time of or in the years after the French Revolution. Anyway, on this course we stick to UK and US examples, Mr. Sandel, so let's do that. Otherwise we don't get credit in the exam, as interesting as they are. So various words beginning with U that students usually get jumbled to do with constitution. They are uncodified, unentrenched, and unitary. Uncodified. An uncodified constitution is one in which laws are not set down in a single document. Okay, so the UK constitution is uncodified. There are all these various texts like Erskine May kicking around that you'll discuss in class with your government teacher, but there isn't the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, of course, in America, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. There isn't that written document, we the people, all that American stuff. There's not that. Unentrenched, meaning that laws are easy to change by a simple majority, or a new government comes in, changes the laws, no parliament can bind its successor. Very different in America. You try and ban guns, very sensible policy probably, you need to change the constitution. That requires an amendment, and by gosh, you're going to struggle there to get any kind of bipartisanship on that. Oh, bipartisanship, sorry, when both parties work together in Congress, but again that's an upper 6th, year 13 American term. Wrong video. Unitary then, final one of those U's, uncodified, unentrenched, unitary, is where a nation, unitary, where a nation is unified under one supreme government, which we are, in spite of devolution, where power has been ceded to Northern Ireland, to Wales, to the Stormont Assembly, to the Senedd in Cardiff, and to Holyrood and the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. So yeah, laws, statute law. Statute law is a law passed by an Act of Parliament. That is, and always has been really since medieval times, our best form of lawmaking. Best in terms of its strength, its ability to be tested in the courts. Convention is something which is not written down, but it's just the way we've done things, very British. Yeah, a convention is, for example, that Parliament is not misled by the Prime Minister. Think back to the premiership of Boris Johnson on that. Allegedly. Common law, where the process of judicial rulings which create legal precedents. So a ruling on some new, I don't know, think about technology. We didn't have the internet 30 years ago. Well, we did, but not in the sense that we do today. Therefore, there are new crimes, cyber crimes, which simply the technology didn't exist in order to commit these crimes 30 years ago. They do now. So when judges make a decision on those, it passes into common law and sets a legal precedent, which creates a steer for a future judge to decide, whether something is wrong or not legally. Authoritative works, documents like Erskine May, which basically give guidance to the way in which Parliament should operate. Treaties, I think those are international agreements which impact on the way a country operates. Think of the Lisbon Treaty, for example, under the EU. Manifesto, the policies a government comes with to the electorate in order to try and get them to vote for them. Think of the 1983 Michael Foot Labour manifesto, nicknamed the longest suicide note in history, not very useful one. Or think about Jeremy Corbyn's 2019 manifesto, which contains some really bold and positive policies that would be pretty mainstream socialism in most of Europe, and yet were smeared, if you like, by the Tory party as being economically ruinous, and would literally, bring Armageddon down upon our shores. And yet, in the end, of course, this is the wonderful thing about politics, or the terrible thing about politics in this case, is that Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson went on to spend far more money as a Conservative government because of the COVID pandemic than Corbyn would have ever dreamed of spending in normal times. And despite the inflationary pressures at the moment, the sun is still coming up and we're still alive. A rare moment of Corbyn support from me there. I don't know where that came from, really. Anyway, constitutional reform is this idea of improving the way in which our UK system, or indeed any system, works. Codification is when you take all the constitutional law and put it into one authoritative document. I mentioned the Code Napoleon earlier on, the Napoleonic Code. In France, laws are set out into code form. It is codified. It is not codified in the UK. The West Lothian question. So this idea comes from devolution, and the idea, and the West Lothian question has given birth to something called EVEL, which is interesting. EVEL is the acronym. So let me backtrack. The West Lothian question is this idea that because Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales have been given devolution on a number of areas, for example tax, let's say, or education policy, you now have Scottish MPs, like say Ian Blackford, the leader of the SNP at Westminster, who are able to, in theory, vote on English laws. Because, get this, there is no English Parliament. There is a UK Parliament in England, but there is no English Parliament. But there is a Scottish one, Northern Irish and a Welsh one. So the Scottish MPs, let's pick on Scotland, for example, can vote on matters that affect only English people. And if you think that's wrong, and it is, that problem is known as the West Lothian question, just after that region of Scotland. So the convention is that those MPs don't vote, and it hasn't actually created that many problems. If there's a vote on, I don't know, income tax policy in England, the Scottish MPs, the Welsh MPs, the Ulster MPs will simply abstain. But they don't have to. And so that's led to a movement known as English Votes for English Laws, which attempts to formalise this more. This attempt was EVEL was passed in 2015, but it's not had much significance, and it's not been needed in a huge way. Parliamentary sovereignty. So this was a big issue in the EU referendum in 2016 and in the Brexit fallout years that we're still living through 6, 7, 8 years later. What is sovereignty? sovereignty resides with Parliament in the UK, the Westminster Parliament. Sovereignty means the supreme law-making body. Now, Brexiteers will tell you we didn't have sovereignty under the EU because EU laws and the EU Supreme Court, and this is true, could override the UK Parliament and Supreme Court in London, and that is fundamentally wrong, a Brexiteer will tell you. The other argument from the Remain perspective is that, yes, in giving up some power to the European Parliament, which is, and the European Commission and the Council of Europe, which is, in the view of Brexiteers, unelected. It is actually elected, but yes, admittedly, rather indirectly. In giving up that power, we are getting the right to live and work in 28 member states, a seat at the table to shape policy. One heck of a discount, thanks to the wonderful opt-outs that Margaret Thatcher negotiated in the 1980s. The right not to join the euro, for example. And most importantly of all, free access, tariff-free, to an enormous market of something like 500 million people. And we gave that up. Or rather, those who were able to vote in 2016 decided very, very marginally to give that up. Anyway, I'm starting to become biased. Enough. Yeah, sovereignty is very, very important to Brexiteers. You could also argue, in a globalised world, you know, who really has sovereignty? Does Kim Jong-un have sovereignty in North Korea? No, he's reliant on the Chinese. You know, who truly has sovereignty? So it's a really quite nebulous concept, some would argue, and well worth thinking about, well worth reflecting on, you know, the nature of sovereignty and power, because it is crucial and very, very important in the minds of many interested in democratic legitimacy. It links with the democratic deficit idea as well, doesn't it, on your politics part of the course. Okay, federal. So this is the idea, like the US, where there's a two-tier political system, the federal government and the state government, and power is divided between them. We may appear to be federal in the UK because of devolution, but we're not. Those powers that have been given to Scotland, to Northern Ireland, etc., can be taken back. So this is where the independence movements like Plaid Cymru, like the SNP, get angry, because it's almost like this paternal relationship between parent and child, giving some freedom to Scotland, but actually they can't declare war. They can't shape their political future, or indeed they don't have sovereignty, to take it back to that previous word. Bicameral is simply two-chamber in Latin, so we have a bicameral legislature, so do the Americans, House of Commons, House of Lords. In America, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Whips sound fascinating, these. Sometimes people talk about a three-line whip. That's where a law is underlined, a bill is underlined. A bill, remember, is a law before it becomes a law, or an act of Parliament. Underlined 3 times. You must vote on this as an MP. So whips are MPs who work for the executive, work for the cabinet, work for the party leader, telling MPs in their own party how to vote on a particular issue and whether they have to vote. If it's a free vote or a vote of conscience on something like, say, abortion, then MPs can vote with their conscience. Normally, though, they're told by the whips, you vote this way or you'll have the whip removed. That means you will no longer be sat as a Conservative or a Labour MP or a Lib Dem MP or a Green MP. There's only one of those. You will continue to sit, but as an independent. You can't really be sacked as an MP until the next election, of course. or unless you commit some hideous crime. Parliament, which is part of what's called recall of MPs, actually, which is a relatively recent innovation too. Parliamentary privilege, this is interesting and has existed for centuries. MPs cannot be prosecuted or sued for anything they say in the House of Commons. As a result, they have that privilege, basically, to name particular alleged criminals, etc. A confidence motion is one where it is essentially, we've had a lot of these recently, is a vote to determine whether the Commons still supports the government of the day. If a Prime Minister loses a vote of no confidence, he or she normally resigns. The Salisbury Convention is where the Lords will not block a manifesto pledge when it becomes an Act of Parliament, or as the passage of that bill through Parliament. So if it's a manifesto pledge, it's been directly voted for by the people, the Lords won't override it. They could in theory, but they won't override it. So yeah, a bill, remember, is an Act of Parliament as it's passing through Parliament. Royal assent, where the monarch gives the final sort of green light to a bill. Okay, a few more terms for you. Try and wrap this up soon. Backbenchers, ordinary MPs who do not sit in cabinet, and they don't sit on the government or the opposition backbenches. Front benches. They are therefore backbench MPs. They may be ex-prime ministers even, like Theresa May, or leaders of the opposition, like Ed Miliband. So, they can be pretty senior. In fact, when they are senior like that, somebody like David Davis, Ian Duncan Smith and the Conservative Party, they're known rather flatteringly as big beasts as well. Select committees are departmental committees that investigate and inquire into the workings of a government department. So there might be the Education Select Committee, the Home Office Select Committee. A liaison committee is a biannual meeting of chairpersons of the various select committees that then quiz the PM, quiz the Prime Minister. So there's that dialogue back and forth going on as well. Policy are the aims and strategies of the government. The core executive are the central group of advisors and ministers that coalesce around the PM, the Prime Minister. Civil servants are those people employed by the state to carry out the running of the country. They are not partisan. They can go and vote privately at elections, but they serve whichever government is in power, which is a massive advantage for the government over the opposition, incidentally. They don't have a secretariat or a civil service behind them. Prime Minister we've talked about as well. Presidentialism, it's a more recent one, it's since Tony Blair really. It's this idea that certain prime ministers focus on behaving like a president rather than governing through cabinet or through parliament as primus inter pares, or first amongst equals. Spatial leadership is the idea where the Prime Minister puts space between him or herself and their own cabinet, a more sort of individual form of leadership. The cabinet then. All of the ministers, the senior ministers around the PM, heads of government departments, the foreign minister, the head of the Home Office, the education secretary, foreign secretary I should say, not foreign minister, foreign secretary is known in British English, Secretary of State in America, the Minister for Levelling Up, the Attorney General, these various roles that support the Prime Minister and make collective decisions. And whilst they can say what they like in the privacy of the cabinet room, when meetings are held in number 10 Downing Street, the reality is they have to then take collective responsibility for those decisions. And if you don't like the collective decision that a Prime Minister makes, then and he has but one voice in that cabinet, but he makes the final call, then and you don't publicly support the government, you need to resign as a minister. You still keep your MP job, but you need to resign as a minister with all the power and salary and responsibility that carries with it. So in addition to collective responsibility, we also have individual responsibility, and there we're talking about ministers being responsible for their own personal conduct and the actions of their department. We had controversy over Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, bullying various civil servants in her department. She's found guilty of that, should have resigned in my view because of individual responsibility, and didn't. Again, that fed into the whole sort of toxic narrative of Boris Johnson. The Prime Minister ultimately decides, and this was the problem with Johnson and Partygate, is that he was marking his own homework in a sense. You know, normally the Prime Minister is above reproach and decides whether a minister has fallen foul of the ministerial code. He had to decide whether he himself had with Partygate. So individual responsibility. The Ministerial Code of Conduct, incidentally, is a list of rules by which ministers are expected to abide in terms of personal behaviour, financial behaviour, and all of that. Okay, final few on government. The Supreme Court, the top legal authority in the UK. Constitutional Reform Act of 2005 gave birth to that in 2009. It is an appellate court, which means that it hears appeals from lower courts. Judicial independence is the principle that judges are not controlled or influenced by other branches of the government. The final sort of thing to look at, I suppose, is really in terms of the EU, is that although we've now left, an MEP was a member of the European Parliament, and those were elected for regions of the UK. For example, here, the southwest of the UK. But those judgments, although you still need to know them for your exam, under this syllabus, are no longer directly relevant to the UK. One final one perhaps is the Factor Tame case. The Factor Tame case, which was a legal case of way back in 1990 that established a legal precedent that statute laws that undermine EU law can be suspended. So EU law was superior. That, of course, was a real anathema to Brexiteers. Anyway, some useful points hopefully there in terms of keywords on the UK government side of the course. Good luck in your exams.